First Contact Protocol Captain Jake Morrison stood in the observation deck of the UES Horizon, watching the massive alien vessel approach through the viewport. 3 months had passed since humanity received the first message from the Zephyrian Empire. Now, face to face with their first alien contact, his palms were sweating despite the ship's climate control. The Zephyrian diplomatic ship was unlike anything human engineers had imagined. Its surface rippled like liquid mercury, constantly shifting between silver and deep blue. No hard edges existed anywhere on its hull, as if the entire vessel had been grown rather than built. When it docked with the Horizon, the connection was seamless, their ship somehow adapting to human technology instantly. Jake's communication officer, Lieutenant Tom Bradley, looked up from his console with wide eyes. "Captain, they're requesting permission to board. Their translator seems to understand English perfectly." "Grant permission," Jake replied, straightening his uniform. "And Tom, remember the briefing. We know nothing about their capabilities except that they claim to be peaceful." The airlock hissed open, and 3 figures emerged. Jake's breath caught in his throat. The Zephyrians were humanoid, but clearly not human. They stood 7 feet tall with graceful, elongated limbs. Their skin had a subtle luminescent quality, shifting between pale silver and soft gold. Most striking were their eyes, large and expressive, with pupils that seemed to contain swirling galaxies. The center figure stepped forward. She moved with fluid grace, her long silver hair flowing behind her like water. When she spoke, her voice was melodic, almost hypnotic. "I am Ambassador Kira of the Zephyrian Council. We come seeking friendship between our peoples." Jake extended his hand in the traditional human greeting. "Captain Jake Morrison, representing the United Earth Space Command. Welcome aboard the Sea." Horizon. As their hands touched, Kira's eyes widened slightly. She tilted her head, studying Jake with an intensity that made him uncomfortable. Her companions exchanged glances, and Jake noticed their pupils dilating and contracting in what seemed like a pattern. "Is something wrong, Ambassador?" Jake asked, trying to keep his voice steady. Kira smiled, but it wasn't entirely reassuring. "Forgive me, Captain. Your species is more fascinating than our scouts reported. We Zephyrians possess what you might call emotional perception. We sense the feelings of others as clearly as you see colors." Jake's heart rate increased. The briefing had mentioned nothing about telepathic abilities. "You can read minds?" "Not thoughts," Kira clarified, taking a step closer. "Emotions, intentions, the true nature of a being's heart." She paused, her gaze never leaving his face. "You're afraid, Captain, but not of us. You're afraid of failure, of making the wrong decision for your people. Yet underneath that fear, there's something else." Jake swallowed hard. "What do you sense?" "Curiosity," she said, moving even closer. "Wonder, and something my people rarely encounter in first contact situations." Her smile grew warmer. "You find us beautiful." Heat rushed to Jake's face. Around them, his crew shifted uncomfortably while the other Zephyrians watched with apparent amusement. Jake wanted to deny it, to maintain professional composure, but something in Kira's expression suggested that dishonesty would be pointless. "I apologize if that's inappropriate," he managed. Kira laughed, the sound like silver bells. "Among my people, honest emotion is never inappropriate. It's refreshing, actually. Most species we encounter try to hide their true feelings behind walls of deception." She reached out, almost touching his face before stopping. "You wear your harp-like armor, Captain Morrison. It's quite admirable." The diplomatic meeting that followed was unlike anything in human history. With Kira able to sense the emotions of everyone present, negotiations moved at an unprecedented pace. Lies were impossible, hidden agendas were exposed immediately, and genuine intentions were rewarded with trust. Understanding the gift 3 days into the diplomatic talks, Jake found himself spending more time with Kira than protocol strictly required. She had requested private meetings to discuss cultural differences, but Jake suspected there was more to it than official business. They sat in the ship's observation lounge, Earth visible through the massive viewport as a blue marble against the star field. Kira had removed her formal diplomatic robes, wearing instead a simple silver garment that seemed to shift and flow like liquid metal. "Tell me about fear," she said suddenly, her large eyes focused on Jake with that same intense curiosity he'd noticed during their first meeting. Jake shifted in his chair. "Fear? What do you want to know? When we first met, I sensed layers of fear in you, but they weren't simple. Most beings fear death, pain, rejection. Your fears were more complex." She leaned forward. "You fear letting your people down, making the wrong choice, being remembered as the captain who destroyed humanity's future." The accuracy of her observation was unsettling. "Your people don't feel fear? We do, but differently. Our fears are immediate and practical. We fear the disruption of harmony, the loss of emotional connection, the silence that comes when feelings are blocked." She paused. "But your fear drives you forward rather than holding you back. It makes you stronger." Jake considered this. "Fear keeps us alive. It makes us careful, makes us plan for dangers we haven't even seen yet." Kira nodded slowly. "This is why the Council sent me specifically to meet with humans. Among my people, I'm considered unusual because I study what you call courage. Most Zephyrians avoid beings who feel intensely because the emotions can be overwhelming. But intensity fascinates me." "Is that why you keep coming closer?" Jake asked. "Even when you can sense how nervous it makes me?" Her smile was enigmatic. "Partly, but there's another reason." She stood and moved to the viewport, her silhouette graceful against the starlight. "In our observations of your species, we've noticed something remarkable. Humans bond across differences in ways we never expected. You form alliances with former enemies, love those who are unlike you, sacrifice for strangers." Jake joined her at the window. "And that interests the Zephyrian Council?" "It terrifies them," Kira admitted. "We've contacted 17 species before yours. Each interaction followed predictable patterns based on their emotional makeup. But humans are different. Your emotions contradict each other constantly. You can be afraid and brave simultaneously, angry and compassionate, selfish and selfless." She turned to face him directly. "When I read your emotions that first day, I expected to find simple attraction and dismiss it. Instead, I found something my people have never encountered." "Which is?" "The ability to feel deeply for someone you barely know, simply because you recognize their worth." Her voice grew softer. "You weren't just attracted to my appearance, Captain. You felt protective of me, curious about my thoughts, hopeful for my happiness, all within moments of meeting." Jake felt heat rise in his cheeks again. "That's embarrassing." "That's extraordinary," Kira corrected. "My people require years to develop such feelings, if they develop them at all. We bond slowly, carefully, with extensive emotional compatibility testing. But humans leap first and think later." She reached out and this time did touch his face, her fingers cool against his skin. "The Council fears that human emotional intensity could destabilize our society, but I believe it could strengthen it." Jake covered her hand with his own. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying that this diplomatic mission isn't just about trade agreements and territory borders. It's about whether two species can bridge a gap that seems impossible." Her eyes seemed to glow brighter. "And I'm saying that I volunteered for this mission, not just as an ambassador, but as an explorer." "Exploring what?" "The possibility that emotional intensity isn't chaos to be controlled, but strength to be embraced." She moved closer, close enough that Jake could feel the subtle warmth radiating from her skin. The possibility that what I'm feeling right now isn't diplomatic curiosity, but something much more dangerous. Jake's heart hammered against his ribs. Dangerous how? Because if the council discovers that their chief emotion reader has developed feelings for a human, it could end all hope of alliance between our peoples. She smiled sadly. And because despite knowing that, I find myself wanting to explore those feelings anyway. The silence stretched between them, filled with the hum of the ship's engines and the weight of implications neither fully understood. The test of truth a week into negotiations. Everything changed when the Zephyrian Council ship arrived. Jake watched from the bridge as the massive vessel dwarfed both the Horizon and Kira's diplomatic ship. Unlike the fluid, organic curves of the ambassador's craft, this ship was angular and imposing, its surface a mirror black that seemed to absorb light. "Captain," Tom Bradley called from communications, "we're receiving a transmission from the council ship. They're requesting immediate transport of Ambassador Kira." Jake's stomach tightened. Since their conversation in the observation lounge, he and Kira had been careful to maintain professional distance during official meetings. But he couldn't shake the feeling that their growing connection was somehow visible to anyone who cared to look. Kira appeared on the bridge moments later, her usual calm replaced by tension Jake could see in every line of her body. "Captain Morrison, I must return to my ship immediately. The council has questions about my reports." Their eyes met for just a moment, and Jake saw something that chilled him. Fear. Not the complex, driving fear she'd found so fascinating in humans, but simple, immediate terror. "Is there anything we can do?" he asked quietly. "Continue the negotiations with my diplomatic team," she replied formally. "I will return as soon as possible." But as she moved toward the airlock, she paused beside Jake's chair. To anyone watching, it would look like a casual moment, but her words were barely a whisper. "They know, Jake. Somehow, they know." Hours passed with no word from the council ship. Jake tried to focus on the ongoing negotiations, but Kira's team seemed as distracted as he felt. Finally, Lieutenant Commander Rebecca Hayes, his first officer, approached during a break in talks. "Captain, I'm picking up some unusual energy readings from the council ship. It looks like some kind of scanning or testing procedure." Jake's blood ran cold. "Testing?" "The patterns are consistent with what we might use for psychological evaluation or interrogation," Rebecca continued. "Sir, if they're putting Ambassador Kira through some kind of trial because of her interactions with us." She didn't need to finish. Jake understood the implications. If the Zephyrian Council decided that Kira had been compromised, it wouldn't just end her career. It could end any chance of peace between their species. "Can we get a message to her?" Jake asked. "Not without risking an international incident," Rebecca replied. "But Captain, there might be another way." Before Jake could ask what she meant, the communication console chimed. Tom Bradley's face was grim as he turned toward the captain's chair. "Sir, we're receiving a transmission from Ambassador Kira. She's requesting permission to return to the Horizon, but—" He paused. "Captain, she's not alone. The entire Zephyrian Council is coming with her." 20 minutes later, Jake stood in the largest conference room aboard the Horizon, facing 12 of the most alien beings he'd ever encountered. Unlike Kira and her team, the council members were clearly ancient. Their skin had deepened from silver to platinum, their eyes held depths that spoke of centuries of experience, and their movements were precise and deliberate. Kira stood beside them, her head held high, but her emotions clearly strained. Jake could see the effort it took for her to maintain composure. The leader of the council, introduced as Elder Zara, stepped forward. When she spoke, her voice carried authority that made Jake's bones vibrate. "Captain Morrison, we have come to resolve a matter of great importance. Our ambassador has reported emotional contamination from her exposure to your species. Jake's heart sank, but he kept his expression neutral. I'm not sure I understand, Elder Zara. Do not dissemble, human. We are all emotion readers here. Elder Zara's eyes seemed to pierce straight through him. You have formed an attachment to Ambassador Kira, and she to you. This threatens the objectivity required for proper diplomatic relations. With respect, Jake replied carefully. Ambassador Kira has conducted herself with complete professionalism throughout our negotiations. Professionalism is not the issue. Another council member interjected. The issue is contamination. Kira has been exposed to human emotional intensity for too long. She is no longer capable of objective analysis. Kira stepped forward. Council members, I request permission to speak. Elder Zara nodded curtly. You sent me to study human emotions because I was your expert on interspecies emotional dynamics. Kira began, her voice steady despite the circumstances. You wanted to understand how humans could be so effective at forming alliances across species barriers. I have found the answer. She turned to look directly at Jake. Humans don't form alliances through emotional control or careful compatibility matching. They form them through the courage to be vulnerable, to care about others, even when that caring might hurt them. Elder Zara's expression remained impassive. And you believe this vulnerability is strength rather than weakness? I know it is, Kira replied firmly. Captain Morrison has spent every day of these negotiations worried that he might make the wrong choice for his people. But that fear hasn't paralyzed him. It's made him more careful, more considerate, more determined to find solutions that work for everyone. She paused, her luminescent skin brightening slightly. And yes, I have developed feelings for him. But those feelings haven't compromised my judgment. They've enhanced it. I understand humans now in a way that pure observation never could have achieved. She paused, her luminescent skin brightening slightly. And yes, I have developed feelings for him. But those feelings haven't compromised my judgment. They've enhanced it. I understand humans now in a way that pure observation never could have achieved. The council members exchanged glances, their pupils contracting and dilating in that complex pattern Jake had noticed before. The choice between worlds. Elder Zara raised her hand, and the room fell silent. Jake could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on him like a physical force. The future of human-Zephyrian relations balanced on whatever happened next. Ambassador Kira, Elder Zara said slowly, you claim that emotional attachment enhances rather than compromises judgment. This goes against everything our civilization has taught for millennia. Then perhaps it's time to question those teachings, Kira replied, her voice gaining strength. In 17 first contact scenarios, we've achieved basic diplomatic relations with only 3 species. The others found us too cold, too calculating, too afraid of genuine connection. Another council member, his platinum skin almost white with age, leaned forward. Those relationships ended because emotional entanglements led to chaos and conflict. We learned to protect ourselves. We learned to isolate ourselves, Kira corrected. Elder Vex, you've read the reports. Humans have formed lasting alliances with 12 different species. They've resolved conflicts that we would have considered impossible. They've built a coalition spanning half the galaxy, all based on emotional bonds we've dismissed as primitive. Jake watched the exchange, fascinated by the glimpse into Zephyrian society. But as the debate continued, he noticed something troubling. Kira's luminescence was flickering, her skin occasionally dimming to almost human pale before brightening again. Rebecca Hayes noticed it too. She moved closer to Jake and whispered, Captain, Ambassador Kira's vital signs are fluctuating. Whatever's happening here is taking a serious toll. Jake made a decision that would either save the negotiations or destroy them completely. He stepped forward, interrupting the council's debate. Elder Zara, with respect, I think you're asking the wrong question. Every Zephyrian eye turned toward him. The temperature in the room seemed to drop several degrees. "Explain yourself, human," Elder Zara said coldly. "You're debating whether Ambassador Kira's feelings compromise her judgment. But the real question is, what has she accomplished that previous ambassadors couldn't?" Jake moved to stand beside Kira, close enough to offer support without appearing threatening. "In 2 weeks, she's negotiated trade agreements that your economic projections said would take months. She's resolved territorial disputes that had been stalled for years. She's created a framework for scientific cooperation that neither species had imagined possible." He turned to address the entire council. "How did she do that? By understanding not just our words, but our hearts. By recognizing that humans negotiate with emotion as much as logic. By caring enough about the outcome to find solutions that work for everyone." Elder Vex's expression remained skeptical. "And you believe this success justifies abandoning our principles of emotional distance?" "I believe," Jake said carefully, "that your principles might have evolved as protection rather than wisdom. Ambassador Kira told me that Zephyrians fear emotional chaos. But what if the real threat isn't chaos? What if it's stagnation?" Kira looked at him with surprise, and something that might have been pride. "What do you mean, Captain?" "You've contacted 17 species and achieved basic relations with 3. That's not a great track record for a species that claims emotional superiority." Jake knew he was taking an enormous risk, but something in the council's reactions told him he was on the right path. Maybe the problem isn't that other species are too emotional. Maybe it's that you're not emotional enough. A silence that followed was deafening. Jake could hear his own heartbeat, could sense the tension radiating from everyone in the room. Then Elder Zara did something unexpected. She laughed. The sound was nothing like Kira's musical laughter. It was deep, rich, and slightly rusty, like an instrument that hadn't been played in years. "Remarkable," she said, her eyes brightening. "In 2 minutes, you've provided more insight into our diplomatic failures than centuries of analysis." She looked at Kira with what might have been approval. "Your human has a point, Ambassador. Perhaps we have confused caution with wisdom." Another council member, younger than the others, stepped forward. "Elder Zara, are you suggesting we abandon emotional regulation entirely?" "I'm suggesting we examine whether our regulation has become strangulation," Elder Zara replied. "Look at Ambassador Kira. Yes, she has developed feelings for Captain Morrison. But has this made her less effective or more effective?" The question hung in the air. Jake watched as the council members seemed to communicate through some means. He couldn't perceive, their eyes flickering and pupils shifting in rapid patterns. Finally, Elder Zara spoke again. "Ambassador Kira, Captain Morrison, we propose a test. Continue your negotiations, but with expanded scope. We want to see whether this emotional approach can achieve what traditional diplomacy cannot." "What kind of test?" Jake asked. "Full alliance," Elder Vex said, his tone suggesting he thought the idea was insane. "Complete integration of military, economic, and scientific resources. The kind of agreement that has never been successfully negotiated between species with such different emotional profiles." Kira's skin brightened considerably. "The Council is willing to authorize me to negotiate a full alliance?" "We're willing." "To let you try," Elder Zara corrected. "But understand, Ambassador, the stakes are now much higher. If this approach fails, it won't just end your career. It could set back interspecies relations for generations." Jake felt the weight of responsibility settle on his shoulders like a lead blanket. But when he looked at Kira, saw the hope and determination in her expression, he knew there was only one answer he could give. "We accept," he said firmly. "We'll show you what humans and Zephyrians can accomplish when we stop being afraid of, caring about each other." Beyond the impossible 6 months later, Jake stood in the newly constructed Human-Zephyrian Joint Command Center watching data streams from across the galaxy. The facility itself was a marvel of cooperative engineering, with human practicality seamlessly integrated with Zephyrian artistry. The walls curved like Kira's ship, but the workstations were built for human comfort and efficiency. The Alliance had exceeded everyone's expectations. Trade routes established in weeks rather than years. Scientific breakthroughs achieved through emotional understanding of research motivations. Military strategies that combined human adaptability with Zephyrian predictive capabilities. But it was the smaller changes that impressed Jake most. Zephyrian children were learning to express emotions openly, while human diplomats were developing emotional awareness that made negotiations more honest and effective. The two species weren't just allied, they were learning from each other. The council meeting starts in 10 minutes, Kira said, approaching with a data tablet. She moved with the same grace as always, but now there was an ease to her presence that hadn't existed during those first tense negotiations. She'd changed in other ways too. Her hair was shorter now, a practical style that worked with both Zephyrian formal wear and human utility uniforms. Her skin's luminescence had stabilized at a warm gold that Jake had learned indicated contentment. Any last-minute concerns? Jake asked, accepting the tablet and scanning the agenda. The Altarian situation, she replied. They're still refusing to consider alliance with any species that includes humans. They claim your emotional volatility makes you unreliable partners. Jake smiled grimly. The Altarians were a species of pure logic, making them almost as challenging for humans to work with as they were for Zephyrians. What's the Council's position? Elder Zara wants to demonstrate our hybrid approach, Kira said. She's convinced that emotional awareness, combined with logical analysis, is superior to either approach alone. They entered the council chamber. Together, a room that had been redesigned to accommodate both species comfortably. The Zephyrian council members sat in their traditional formation, but human advisors were integrated throughout, creating a mixed group that would have been unthinkable a year ago. Elder Zara called the meeting to order, her voice carrying the same authority Jake remembered from their first encounter. But there was warmth there now, an emotional openness that made her seem less alien and more like a grandmother who happened to be from another world. The Altarian delegation has presented their final position, she announced. They will ally with the Zephyrian Empire, but only if we exclude humans from all strategic planning and military cooperation. A murmur of discontent rippled through the chamber. Jake felt his own anger rise, but he'd learned to recognize and channel the emotion rather than be controlled by it. What's their reasoning? Asked Rebecca Hayes, who had been promoted to liaison officer between the species. Elder Vex activated a holographic display showing communication logs. They argue that human emotional responses are too unpredictable for strategic planning. They cite 17 historical examples of human military decisions that appeared illogical. Jake studied the examples, recognizing several famous battles and diplomatic incidents. These aren't examples of illogical decisions, he said slowly. They're examples of humans prioritizing values over pure strategic advantage. Explain, Elder Zara requested, the Battle of New Geneva. The Altarians list it as an example of humans making an irrational military choice. But humans held that position because evacuating would have meant abandoning 10,000 civilians. The strategic choice would have been to retreat. The human choice was to protect innocent lives. Kira moved to stand beside him, her skin brightening as she picked up on his emotional state. Captain Norrison is correct. In each example, humans chose values-based decisions over purely logical ones. But those decisions weren't mistakes. She activated another display, showing the long-term outcomes of the battles in question. In every case, the human approach achieved strategic objectives that pure logic couldn't have predicted. They won allies, gained trust, inspired loyalty. They built relationships that lasted for generations. Elder Zara nodded thoughtfully. The Altarians see this as proof of irrationality. We see it as proof of a different kind of intelligence. There's another factor, Jake added. The Altarians want us excluded from strategic planning, but they're willing to ally with Zephyrians, who now use emotional analysis in their decision-making. They don't realize that our two species have already integrated our approaches. The irony wasn't lost on anyone in the room. The Altarians were trying to separate two species that had become emotionally and strategically interdependent. What do you recommend? Elder Zara asked. Jake and Kira exchanged glances. Over the months of working together, they developed an ability to communicate with minimal words, understanding each other's thoughts through emotional awareness that bridged the gap between their species. We demonstrate the strength of our alliance, Kira said, not through words or negotiations, but through action. The Centauri crisis, Jake added, naming the biggest threat currently facing the galactic community. 3 species locked in a territorial war that's disrupting trade routes and threatening to spread. The Altarians have declared it unsolvable through logical intervention. Elder Zara's eyes gleamed with interest. You're proposing that we solve a crisis the Altarians consider impossible? We're proposing that we solve it together, Jake corrected. Using the combined approach that they claim makes us unreliable. If we succeed, it proves that emotional intelligence and logical analysis are stronger together than either is alone. The chamber fell silent as the implications sank in. Success would validate everything they'd built together. Failure would prove the Altarians right and potentially destroy the human-Zephyrian alliance. Elder Vex was the first to speak. The risk is enormous. If we fail, we lose credibility with half the galaxy. If we don't try, Kira replied, we prove that we're afraid of our own potential. Jake felt the familiar surge of fear and excitement that had characterized every major decision of the past year. But now, instead of being paralyzed by the emotion, he was energized by it. The question isn't whether we might fail, he said. The question is whether we're willing to show the galaxy what humans and Zephyrians can accomplish when we combine the courage to care with the wisdom to think. Elder Zara stood, her decision made. Very well. Ambassador Kira, Captain Morrison, you have the Council's authorization to attempt mediation of the Centauri crisis. Show us what love and logic can accomplish together. As they left the chamber, Kira took Jake's hand, a gesture that would have been unthinkable during their first meeting. Her skin was warm and bright with anticipation. Ready to save the galaxy? She asked with a smile. Jake squeezed her hand, feeling the strength of their connection and the bond between their peoples. With you, I'm ready for anything.